Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Was willst du dich betrüben, which translates to why do you want to distress yourself? This is a chorale with instrumental interludes just like yesterday's, so I've opted to remove them from this particular analysis just because I'm focusing on the vocal portions of Bach's chorales. Most of the chorales are purely vocal arrangement, maybe with some instrumental doubling or tripling of one of the vocal lines, but this has distinct instrumental interludes that I have opted to remove from my analysis just because I'm focusing on the vocal writing. But this is a chorale with some interesting tidbits. It's the first chorale that we've looked at that's in 6/8, and it has that longer form flowy nature that 6/8 tends to impart on a texture. It has that swaying feeling, and the harmonic rhythm is relatively slow, or it's relatively spaced out. It's not necessarily slow. But let's hop into the analysis. It's pretty straightforward. So 2 sharps in the key signature. We start on B minor, we end on B major. So I reckon we're in the key of B minor to start things off. Our first cadence that is actually like deliberate at the end of a phrase is at the end of the section. However, there are some implied cadences throughout the chorale that I will highlight as we get to them. And the first one actually happens midway through the phrase here, and I think we briefly visit F sharp minor. So we'll get there. We'll get to the key of F sharp minor throughout our analysis. So we start off with our tonic triad, B, B, D, and F sharp. We then go to D, B, F sharp, and B, which is B minor in first inversion. That's a 6 chord. That's a 1/6 chord. And then we are taken to F sharp major, F sharp, A sharp, F sharp, and C sharp, which is our dominant. It's our 5. And then we go to B minor again, B, B, F sharp, and D, which is our tonic triad. We then get a G sharp in the bass. It's kind of interesting. G sharp, B, B, and E. That is E major over G sharp, which would be a kind of like a harmonization of the melodic minor scale. I reckon it's an uppercase 4. But the interesting thing that's happening here is because we have the E here, I think it would make more sense if this was like a D and this was like tonicizing A, but here we have 4 actually going to, actually no, that makes sense. I'm talking myself through it right now. This makes sense. So we have a harmonization of like melodic minor or some type of mode like B Dorian or something like that, because we don't have G sharp going to A sharp, we have G sharp going to A. So we have one part of the changes that we make to the minor scale in melodic minor. But we have it going to A major, not A diminished or F sharp major. We have A natural, E, A, and C sharp, which is subtonic 7th. And we have this F sharp here, which kind of alludes to this idea of a minor 5, but I think that that's a little bit of a neighbor tone going on. But this is where I think we go to the key of F sharp minor through this A chord, which is now our mediant. That then takes us to C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, and B natural, which is C sharp 7, which would be the 5/7 in the key of F sharp minor, with a couple of neighbor tones in the upper voices. And this is our first sort of implied cadence. It feels like there's a cadence right here. And I'm calling it an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of F sharp minor because we cadence on F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. And then we move immediately afterwards to the key of B minor. Again, we get this minor major juxtaposition. We see this sometimes in Bach. Some people might call it a common tone modulation, where the F sharp and even the C sharp are kept consistent across the chords, but it feels much more direct, where we're going from one triad that's functioning as a tonic to turning its third, or raising its third and turning it into a dominant, which this is what it is now, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A sharp, which is our dominant in the key of B minor. And then we stay in the key of B minor until the end. However, we have kind of an interesting sound here. If you listen to the chorale at the beginning, you'll know that this ending is kind of ambiguous. I think there's an argument to be made that it is also possibly a perfect authentic cadence in the key of F sharp, but cadencing on a major tonic as a means of getting us back to the key of B minor at the beginning, so a chord that aligns with another key. So I think it's still a half cadence, though. It's just what it sounds like to me, but I think you could make the argument that it is a perfect authentic cadence. And I'll offer that analysis when we get there. So we have G, B, F sharp, and B, and we might be tempted to call this a 6-7 chord, which I think that would be an okay analysis. But I think this F sharp is actually a 7-6 suspension over the bass, and it's actually E minor in first inversion, E, G, and B, which would be a 4-6 chord. But they're basically doing the same thing. They're transitioning. It's like a deceptive progression. We then get G sharp, D, B, and B, which is kind of what I thought this chord was or what I expected this chord to be earlier. But here we have a diminished triad, G sharp diminished, which would be 7 of 7. 7 of 7. Sorry, it's weird. We typically don't tonicize the subtonic 7th, but here we are doing so. Let me make that V look more like a V and less like two ones. Then we have A, C sharp, B, and C sharp. It's kind of interesting. We have another suspension here. This time it's a 9/8 suspension. So we know that 7 is being implied here. However, by the time the resolution happens, the chord quality changes. We get F sharp twice in the lower voices, and then we get A natural turning to chord in the F sharp minor. So we do have this idea of a minor dominant happening here. That is, if you believe this section's in B minor, which it sounds like it is to me, even though we do have the makings of F sharp minor at the same time. The A sharp at the end going to F sharp major just makes everything feel like B minor, and also just the leading the melody makes it really feel like we're in the key of B minor. But then we have C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, and C, which is another secondary dominant. That is 5 of 5, which then takes us to this F sharp here, which is in anticipation, this A sharp here, which is, they're all basically foreshadowing the chord to come, which is our dominant in root position, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and F sharp. And notice how the chord is lacking a third, a thing that was a hallmark of yesterday's chorale as well. This B is also like a delayed passing tone. Sorry, let me redo that ending parenthesis so it doesn't block off the accidental. If you were to say that this section was in the key of F sharp minor, I'd say your analysis could happen around here. Or actually, no, it'd have to happen a little bit later. You could say it happens as early as here. We could say that this G sharp diminished chord is not 7 of 7, but rather 7 of... Though G sharp diminished would just be a 2 chord. It would just be a 2 chord in the key of F sharp minor. Sorry, it looks like a 3 chord. Let me go ahead and change that. Very good. And then we have 2 going to 3. And then we get a little bit of a 1 going on right here. Going to 5. Then cadencing on our major tonic, which would lead us back to the key of B minor as our dominant. Like so. So I think both of these analyses are accurate. I would just say that this section, because of the melody, feels more like B minor, but there's definitely some weird like bitonal or modal shenanigans going on here, and it sounds very interesting. But as we move ahead to the next section, we have a phrase that ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major, and we start off with a D major triad. It doesn't quite sound like a I mean, you could force a common chord analysis here, saying that D major is our 3, and in the key of D major that's our tonic. But I think it's also equally valid for you to say that this is a common chord, or sorry, a direct modulation too. We then go to G, B, A, and F sharp, and I don't think that that's analyzable. It's like a chordal or a secundal harmony. So I think it's actually these upper voices that are being suspended. We have a 7/6 suspension and a 9/8 suspension happening at the same time. And by the time they resolve, we have an E minor chord over G, which would be 2/6. And then we have some passing tones in the bass as well. We then have B, D, G, and D, which is G major in first inversion. Right here, that would be a 4/6 chord in the key of D major, and that chord is turned into root position on the the third beat of the measure. So we could say 5/3 happens right there, and then we get A, F sharp, A, and C sharp. This F is a like a 6/5 suspension over the bass. It's like we have the makings of like a 1/6/4 chord here, like the A and the F sharp, but no tonic, right? Because we have C sharp in the melody, but we know that 5 is being implied here because the resolution happens on the on the 6th beat of the measure, and then we cadence on D major, D, F sharp, A, and D, which is our tonic. Now we continue in the key of D major for a while until our next implied cadence, which happens right here, which looks like so. I believe it's a half cadence in the key of D major, so we're just going to keep analyzing in the key of D until we get there. Let me go ahead and rewrite that so it looks a little better. Good, we have A, E, A, and C sharp, which is another dominant chord that's A major in root position. We then have F sharp, A, F sharp, A, and D, which is D major in first inversion. That's our tonic triad. This F sharp's a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. We then have C sharp, E, G, and E. And I'm going to call this a 7 chord in root position, which is kind of interesting because if we look at the chords the notes on the downbeat, we have a C sharp diminished triad. And this A is just an anticipation, but I think you could make the argument that it's also a 5/6 chord if you looked at this A as the chord tone. It depends on how you look at it though. We then go to D, D, A, and F sharp, which is our tonic triad in root position. Now typically this chord progression goes 1/6, 7, 6, 1, because that's just stepwise motion in the bass. However, here we have interesting root position diminished triad. We don't usually see a lot of root position diminished triads, even though we've seen 2 in this chorale. Typically because chords that are in root position, or at least the textbook tells you that forces you into a situation where you have to double the leading tone, but as you can see, Bach just doesn't double the leading tone. He doubles the 3rd or doubles the 5th of the chord. So then we have B, D, B, and F sharp, which is B minor. That is our submediant. And then we have this G sharp again, which is sort of functioning like a secondary leading tone towards A major. This isn't the first time we've seen G sharp function this way. We have G sharp B, G sharp D, B, and F, but because this entire measure is sort of implying a dominant harmony, I think this F is like a 7/6 suspension over the bass, and what's really being implied here is E7 over G sharp, so I'm going to call it 5/6/5 of 5, but you could call it 7 half diminished 7 of 5 as well. I think they're both valid analyses. I just feel like, especially with the E and the bass here, that happens at the end. I feel like this is more implying an E7 chord than it is in a G sharp diminished, because that F does not last as long proportionately as the rest of the notes that support E7. But regardless, this C is a neighbor tone, and the rest of the chord, or the notes, I keep calling them chords, the rest of the notes in the measure are chord tones. And then we cadence on A major, A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our dominant. Okay, so we have a couple of other implied cadences here. They're shorter phrases, at least the way that I hear them, but they're all, the 2 of them are imperfect authentic cadences, and they happen here. So we have one on this beat, and one on this beat, And what ends up happening is we get another A major triad here, so no need to reanalyze. Passing 7th in the bass before we get F sharp, D, A, and B, or D, sorry, that would be a tonic triad, D major, in first inversion. However, if we look at the C natural here, what we might actually be thinking is, sorry, let me reanalyze that. We might be tempted to call it a 1/6 chord, but with that C natural, it might be more logical to call it 5/6 of 4, because D is also the dominant of G, and I think this G is what, or sorry, this C natural is what contextualizes it that way. So we have D, D, F sharp, and C. So on this and right here, this passing 7th is kind of taking the chord and telling us that it is a dominant. However, I think right here is also where we can say that we've modulated to the key of G major, if anything, just very briefly. And I know it's kind of weird to modulate over a secondary dominant. It does happen from time to time, and typically the context in which it does happen is when it's a short phrase, when there's not a lot of time to set up with a common chord between the two keys. But D is a common chord between the two keys. It's just this C right here that changes my analysis, because if we look at this entire measure, we know that D major is the present or the prominent sonority. So I'm lumping all of the analyses into the idea of the whole measure being a secondary dominant rather than just the 6th beat, which is just my opinion. It's up to you however you want to analyze it though. But then we get a little bit of a imperfect authentic cadence here where we cadence on G, which is 1. Then we get another interesting thing here where it's kind of hard to say what exactly is happening here, because there's no real common chord between. I called this a half cadence. It's actually an imperfect authentic cadence. We have another imperfect authentic cadence here, but we're going from G major to F sharp minor, at least the way that I analyze it. So we have G natural, D, G natural, and B, with this passing 7th in the bass, and that takes us to E sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and C sharp. And if we look at it, actually, you know what? We looked at it a chorale a couple of weeks ago, and I think I'm going to go back and change my analysis for the sake of keeping it consistent. So we're going to continue to analyze in the key of D major here, and I'm going to do something. So we're going to call this 5/6 of 4, and then we're going to say that we cadence of 4, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to call this 5/6 of 3, because we get an imperfect authentic cadence here, and then we cadence on 3 in the key, in the key of D major, but it also feels like 1 in the key of F sharp minor. So I'm going to do, to illustrate that, as underneath, we could just say that this is 5/6 going to 1 in the key of G major, and we could say that this is 5/6 going to 1 in the key of F sharp minor. Sorry it took me as long as it did for me to arrive at that particular analysis. But these two phrases, there's definitely some parallelism, or maybe a better term for it is like sub-phrases, because this entire length doesn't get a break in the text or with any type of like fermata until the very end. So they're very much implied cadences because they feel that way due to the nature of the chord progression. So we have tonicization via the dominant of the chord, making it feel like an imperfect authentic cadence, but because we never really modulate, or maybe we could argue that we do modulate here, it's kind of strange, because both of these chords are diatonic to the key of D major, but they feel like tonics on their own if you listen to the phrase in a linear fashion, which is, what most people are going to be doing, so that's what matters. So we have this idea of D going to G, going to F sharp, and then we have C sharp, C sharp, E, and G, and this is where we have our 7 chord in the key of D minor, but it does not go where we expect it to go because I think it's also functioning like 2 in the key of B minor as well. I think I meant to say D major, not D minor, if I said D minor right there. But here we have A sharp, C sharp, E, and F sharp, which is our dominant in first inversion, and it's a 7 chord, so we have 5, 6, 5 here. And it's interesting because immediately we don't resolve to B minor, we resolve to B minor in first inversion, and we would typically expect a 5, 6, 5 chord to resolve to a tonic triad in root position. But we go to 1, 6 instead, and we kind of get a resolution back down to a tonic triad in root position, but this G right here keeps us from analyzing the chord entirely. We then get G. These two B's are chord tones as well, so we don't need to mark them. We could even go as far to say as we get like a 4-6 chord here a little bit, but I don't think it's super important in the grand scheme of this particular chord progression. We then get G, B, F sharp, and B. We've seen this chord in the past right here, and I forgot to mark it as a suspension there, but I mean, you could call it a 6-7 chord in the same way that you could have called this one a 6-7 chord, but I really think this E is functioning like our chord tone, especially now that the lower voices also support it. We have like G, B, E, and B, and I think as the non-chord tone is introduced, we also get the chord in root position as well because the bass changes and the tenor changes, so I'm just going to call it a 4 chord in root position rather than first inversion due to the fact that the other notes change along with the suspension. And then we get F sharp, D, and A sharp. Really interesting. That would be a D augmented triad in first inversion, which I guess you could call it, but we all know that 5-7 is what's being implied here. We have F sharp, E, and A sharp. So no fifth, but that's totally fine. 7 chords can omit the fifth, or dominant 7 chords can omit the fifth, because the fifth is not a defining tone. It's, well, it is a defining tone, but it doesn't, the chord has the same heft without it. It's the 3rd and the 7th that matter more. And then at the end of our chorale, we cadence on B major rather than B minor, as Bach often does in his minor chorales, due to the fact that, well, I would imagine it has to do with the fact that the last movement of the chorale is, or the last movement of the cantata is a chorale, and he wants to end on a more uplifting note. But that concludes my analysis for today. Definitely a very interesting chorale. I think we've seen this spindling off where we see a series of 5 ones in, or tonicized, maybe like tonicized cadences is a good term for it, where we cadence without necessarily modulating out of the key, but because of the sequential nature of the cadence, it kind of does feel like we're modulating a bit, but for the sake of analysis, we are still just moving around the key. And there's another chorale, I forgot the name of it, that had this long ending section with a really long pedal in the melody where it just suspended the note, and then we had this movement through the key. Forgot, I'm gonna have to go back through the chorales and watch it and see how this compares, but this evoked that memory of mine because that was a particularly interesting profile. But with that, I will end the video. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel by watching. If this is the first time you are watching one of my videos, feel free to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification icon so that you get notified of when I upload. I upload once a day, but the time varies, and I'm currently working through all of the chorale harmonizations, or all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. So if you are interested in a daily dose of J.S. Bach and a daily dose of analysis, you can get that by subscribing to the channel and getting notified of when I upload. But that being said, thank you again so much for watching the channel. Thank you so much for supporting me through watching my videos, and I look forward to tomorrow's analysis. I hope you take care.